The city port had always been a busy place. Day and night, ships arrived with containers full of goods from all over the world. Some brought legal trade, while others carried secrets hidden deep inside their metal walls. For years, rumors had floated around that not everything passing through the port was being checked properly. Expensive electronics, drugs, and even illegal machinery had found their way into the country through these docks. But most people were too afraid to question how it happened. That fear began to fade the day a new customs admiral took charge. He wasn't like others who had held the position before him. He was quiet but firm, and when he said something, everyone listened. People respected him because he didn't just sit in his office signing papers. He went to the docks himself, walked among workers, and inspected containers. He had earned a reputation for being sharp and fair, but his growing reputation also meant he was making enemies, especially among those who had been profiting from corruption for years. At first, the admiral didn't suspect anything unusual, but over time, certain patterns caught his eye. Containers marked as cleared were leaving the port faster than normal. Documents didn't match the cargo, and whenever he ordered random inspections, those specific containers suddenly went missing or were replaced. It didn't make sense. Someone was moving things around and they were doing it too smoothly for it to be ordinary smuggling. He began digging quietly. Instead of confronting anyone directly, he gathered data, compared logs, and reviewed camera footage himself late at night. After weeks of work, he started to see what was really happening. It wasn't just smugglers operating from the shadows, it was an inside job. Some officers assigned to port security were allowing certain shipments to pass unchecked. They were getting paid off by smugglers, sometimes through offshore accounts, sometimes in cash dropped off in small amounts. The admiral couldn't believe it at first. These were men who wore the same uniform he did. Still, he didn't rush to take action. He knew that exposing corruption without solid proof would only make things worse, so he decided to alert the Federal Integrity Unit, an agency responsible for investigating internal corruption. They asked him to stay quiet for a while so they could monitor communications and transactions. The admiral agreed. But even though he tried to act normal, some of the corrupt officers began to sense that something was changing. The atmosphere around the port grew tense. The admiral noticed how some of the officers who used to greet him now avoided eye contact. Others stopped talking when he walked by. Some even began spreading rumors that he was too strict, trying to make others turn against him, but he didn't let it bother him. He knew that silence was sometimes the best weapon. Then one afternoon, an officer under investigation quietly leaked information to his associates. He told them that the admiral had contacted the federal unit and was preparing to release evidence within days. That small piece of information spread quickly among the corrupt group, and panic set in. They knew that once the report was made public, it would be over for all of them. That night, they met secretly at a roadside cafe not far from the docks. The atmosphere was tense. They sat at a corner table, speaking in low voices, planning what to do. Some wanted to flee the city before the investigation went public. Others wanted to destroy the evidence. But one man, who seemed to have more control over the group, said there was only one way to stop it. We make sure he never gets the chance to speak. The others hesitated. They knew what that meant. It wasn't easy to turn against a superior officer, especially one with such a clean record, but desperation and fear clouded their judgment. They convinced themselves that if they didn't act, they'd all end up in prison, so they agreed to follow through with the plan. Meanwhile, the admiral continued his work as usual. He had no idea what was being planned against him. Early mornings and late nights had become his routine. He often skipped meals, lost in paperwork and investigations. But there was a sense of purpose in his actions. He believed that cleaning up corruption, even if it meant making enemies, was worth it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, the admiral sat in his office reviewing a set of files sent by an informant. These documents detailed a suspicious shipment scheduled to arrive in 2 days. It was marked as medical equipment, but the shipping logs didn't match the customs declaration. Something about it didn't feel right. As he looked deeper, he found links between that shipment and some of the officers he was already watching. Before he could finish reading, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. The text read, "If you want the real evidence behind the port shipments, come to Dock 47 tonight. Come alone. Midnight." The admiral stared at the message for a long time. It could be a trap, But it could also be the breakthrough he needed. He had received similar anonymous tips before, some useful, some misleading. He decided to take it seriously but proceed carefully. He informed one of his trusted aides to stay alert and monitor his location through his vehicle's GPS, just in case. As midnight approached, the docks were quiet. Only the sound of waves and distant machinery filled the air. The admiral drove himself to Dock 47, headlights off as he approached the area. It was dark, except for the faint glow from a few lamps. He parked near an empty container yard and stepped out, scanning the surroundings. No one was there. He waited a few minutes, looking around for any sign of movement. His phone remained silent. Something felt wrong. Then out of nowhere, a shadow moved behind a stack of containers. The admiral reached for his flashlight and shined it toward the sound, but saw nothing. He called out, asking if anyone was there. The only response was the echo of his voice. A strange unease crept over him. He decided to return to his car, but just as he turned around, a faint click broke the silence. The sound of a weapon being loaded somewhere in the dark. The admiral froze for a second, realizing the danger. His instincts told him to stay calm. He slowly crouched and moved behind a container for cover. His mind raced. Was it a smuggler? Or something worse? A few hundred meters away, hidden behind other containers, 3 men watched him through the sights of their weapons. They wore police tactical gear, but their badges had been removed. Their plan was simple: make it look like a smuggler ambush. Once the admiral was gone, they could claim he had walked into the wrong area during an operation gone wrong. But what they didn't know was that their movement was already being tracked. A small federal surveillance team monitoring the admiral's communications had noticed his phone signal entering a restricted zone. They also picked up multiple unregistered police radios operating in the same area. That triggered an alert. The federal agent on duty immediately flagged the situation as suspicious and notified nearby units to stay ready. Back at the dock, the admiral stayed hidden, trying to make sense of what was happening. He could hear faint footsteps moving closer. He pressed the emergency beacon on his wristwatch, a small device connected to the federal network. Within seconds, his live location was transmitted to the central command. The attackers were getting impatient. One of them whispered, "He's still out there. End it before anyone comes." But the admiral wasn't about to give them an easy target. He stayed low, listening carefully, waiting for the right moment to move. His calmness under pressure had saved him many times before, and tonight would be no different. Minutes felt like hours. Then, from a distance, faint sirens began to echo. The attackers looked at each other, startled. They hadn't expected anyone else to be nearby. The admiral heard it too and took a deep breath. He knew help was coming. The men decided to retreat for now, disappearing into the shadows before the first lights of approaching vehicles appeared at the far end of the dock. Federal agents rushed in, securing the area and finding traces of recent movement, footprints, shell casings, and an unregistered radio left behind in the panic. When the admiral finally stepped out, the agents surrounded him to ensure his safety. Though shaken, he was unharmed. As they drove him back to headquarters, one thing became clear in his mind. This wasn't just about smuggling anymore. Someone within law enforcement had just crossed a line. The night that was supposed to silence him only made him more determined. What began as suspicion had now turned into a mission to uncover how deep the corruption really went and who had tried to end his life in the name of protecting it. The next morning, the admiral barely slept. The events at Dock 47 kept playing in his mind like a broken record. The shadows, the sound of that weapon being loaded, and the way the attackers vanished just before help arrived. It all told him one thing. The people he was after were not outsiders. They were trained, they knew the area too well, and they had access to police-grade equipment. He sat in his office with a cup of coffee growing cold on the table. Outside the window, the port looked calm as usual. Workers moved crates, cranes lifted containers, and ships blew their horns as they docked. To anyone else, it was just another day. But for him, everything had changed. He knew someone from within was trying to get rid of him, and they had come very close to succeeding. Later that morning, 2 federal officers arrived to meet him. They had been monitoring his phone the previous night, and were now leading the follow-up investigation. One of them placed a tablet on the table and showed the admiral thermal images taken by a surveillance drone. 3 heat signatures had been detected near his location, all carrying metal objects consistent with rifles. The images didn't show faces, but their body structure and positioning matched trained personnel. The admiral leaned forward, studying the footage quietly. "They knew what they were doing," he said softly. The federal officer nodded. "And they also knew your routine. This wasn't random. Whoever set that trap knew you'd come alone." The admiral thought about the anonymous message he'd received the night before. Someone had set him up. But who had that information? Only a few people inside his department knew about his private inspections. He realized that the leak had to be from within his own team, someone pretending to be loyal while feeding information to the other side. The federal officers suggested assigning him a protection detail, but he refused. "If they see I'm being guarded, they'll go underground. I need them to think I'm still working as usual," he said. They didn't like the idea, but they understood his reasoning. The admiral wanted to flush them out, not scare them away. Over the next few days, he moved carefully. He acted normal around the port, checked documents, greeted his staff, and carried on like nothing had happened. But behind the calm face, he was watching everyone closely. Every action, every conversation, every glance. He noticed how some of the officers avoided him completely, while others seemed overly friendly. That made it even harder to know who could be trusted. At the same time, the federal team quietly increased surveillance. They tapped into security cameras, monitored phone calls, and tracked movement logs of several officers who had been on duty near Dock 47 that night. Slowly, a clearer picture began to form. The attackers had come in through an unauthorized checkpoint, using a police vehicle that wasn't logged in the system. The license plate belonged to a car reported out of service a week earlier. That meant someone inside the police department was helping them cover their tracks. One evening, as the admiral was about to leave his office, one of his younger officers knocked on the door. He looked nervous and hesitant, glancing around before stepping in. "Sir," he said quietly, "I think I saw something strange on the duty roster. Some of the night shifts from last week have been changed in the system, but the handwriting on the printed log is different." The admiral asked him to show it. When he looked at the records, he saw it too. Someone had manually altered the dates and names of who was on duty during the time of the attack. Whoever did it was trying to erase the trail. The admiral didn't show his reaction. He simply thanked the officer, took the papers, and told him to forget he mentioned it. But deep inside, his suspicions were now certain. There were high-level hands protecting this network. That night, he met with the federal agents again in a small, quiet cafe outside the city. Away from the noise of the port, they discussed their next step. The agents told him they had managed to trace encrypted payments moving through several shell accounts linked to police personnel. The money came from companies that didn't exist on paper. It was clear that the smuggling operation was not small. It was part of a much bigger network. The admiral leaned back in his chair and sighed. "If we move too soon, they'll destroy everything," he said. "But if we wait too long, they'll try again." One of the agents nodded. "We'll need bait," he replied. "Something that makes them act before they're ready. Something that looks like a threat to them." A plan began to form. The admiral would pretend to be close to submitting his corruption report to the federal office. Word would be leaked intentionally through a controlled channel, a message that would reach the ears of those trying to stop him. The goal was simple: make them panic and act again, but this time let the federal team be ready for them. The next morning, the plan was set in motion. The admiral spoke casually about sending files to the capital for review. A few carefully chosen staff members overheard him. Within hours, the information reached the wrong ears, exactly as intended. The corrupt officers began to panic. They believed he was about to expose them for good. Later that evening, in a hidden warehouse on the outskirts of the city, 3 men gathered again. They were the same ones who had tried to ambush the admiral at the dock. This time they were angrier, more desperate. "He's still alive, and now he's got federal people with him," one said bitterly. "We should have finished it that night." Another man slammed his fist on the table. "We have one last chance. If he sends those files, we're done. We can't wait." They started preparing another plan, one that would guarantee success, or so they thought. They decided to intercept him on his way home from the port within the next 48 hours. They knew his route, his car, even the timing of his movements. Everything was mapped out, but they didn't know that the federal agents were already a step ahead. They had tapped the same radio frequencies the attackers used. They also knew that a second attempt was coming soon, so they placed undercover vehicles along the main routes the admiral used, keeping their distance but always in range. Meanwhile, the admiral continued to play his part. He went about his duties as if he had no idea of what was happening behind the scenes. He spent his days reviewing files and meeting shipping inspectors. During lunch breaks, he'd walk through the container yards, casually speaking with workers, pretending everything was normal. But in his heart, he knew this calm was the silence before the storm. That night, as he sat alone in his office, the admiral received another message, this time through a secure line. It was from the federal unit. They had picked up chatter about an operation being planned by the same group. The voice on the other end said, "They'll try soon. Don't change your route. We'll be ready." He didn't like the idea of using himself as bait, but he also knew it was the only way to expose everyone involved. So he agreed. "Let's end this," he replied. The next 2 days were heavy with tension. The admiral went through his routine as planned. He noticed more eyes on him than usual. Officers watching from a distance, cars slowing down as he passed. The port seemed quieter too, as if people sensed that something was about to happen. Even the air felt heavy, filled with invisible pressure. On the second night, just before sunset, the admiral locked his office and walked to his car. The city lights reflected off the water, and the sky had turned a dull orange. He could hear the faint hum of a helicopter in the distance, part of the hidden surveillance team ready to move at a moment's notice. As he started the engine, he glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, he thought he saw a vehicle parked too far back to be random. His instinct told him the plan was in motion. He drove calmly, sticking to his usual route. The road curved along the docks with warehouses on one side and the sea on the other. Far behind him, a black SUV followed with its lights off. Inside were the same men, tense and silent, waiting for the right moment. One of them gripped his radio and whispered, "He's on the move." "Get ready," the admiral's phone buzzed. It was a short text from the federal unit. "We see them. Keep steady." He didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. He just kept driving, his eyes focused ahead. He knew what was coming, but this time he wasn't alone. As he approached the final turn before the main road, the sound of distant sirens began to echo again. The game had begun. The road was quiet except for the soft sound of the car's engine. The admiral kept his hands steady on the wheel, driving through the narrow stretch along the docks. The sea shimmered faintly under the streetlights, and a cool wind brushed against the windshield. Everything seemed normal, yet he could feel something in the air, that strange heaviness that comes when danger hides just out of sight. In his rearview mirror, the dark SUV was still there. It kept its distance, turning whenever he turned, slowing down whenever he slowed down. At this point, the admiral didn't need confirmation. He knew they were following him. What the attackers didn't realize was that federal agents were also following them, staying just far enough to avoid suspicion. The admiral had been trained to stay calm under pressure. But even for someone like him, the wait was nerve-wracking. Every second felt longer than it should. He kept glancing at the small screen on his dashboard that showed his location being tracked by the Federal Command Center. They were watching everything live through satellite and ground cameras. Then a voice crackled in his earpiece, a quiet update from the federal agent monitoring him. "Stay en route. We have eyes on all vehicles. Don't make any sudden moves," he replied in a calm tone. "Understood." A few blocks away, the men inside the black SUV were getting restless. They had been following him for almost 15 minutes, waiting for the right moment. The driver muttered, "We should do it now. He's almost near the main road. Once he's there, it'll be harder." The man in the passenger seat disagreed. "Not yet. Too many cameras. Wait until we're past the storage yard." The admiral turned left, heading into a less crowded area filled with shipping warehouses. The lights were dim and most workers had gone home. It was exactly the kind of place the attackers wanted, quiet and isolated. The moment he entered the stretch between two large container yards, the SUV behind him accelerated slightly. Inside, the federal command van parked a few kilometers away. Multiple screens lit up. They could see the admiral's car and the SUV closing in. One of the agents spoke quickly into his headset. "They're moving. Units 3 and 4, get ready to close off the east end." But before they could act, the situation escalated. The black SUV suddenly swerved to the right, overtaking the admiral's car and stopped sideways in front of him. Another vehicle, a smaller pickup truck, appeared from behind, blocking the road completely. The admiral's car was trapped. He immediately shifted into reverse, trying to assess his surroundings, but before he could move, bright headlights flashed directly into his eyes, blinding him. A figure stepped out of the SUV, holding what looked like a rifle. The admiral ducked instinctively, his training kicking in. He pushed open the driver's door and rolled behind a nearby barrier. The man from the SUV shouted, pretending to sound like law enforcement, "Stop! You're under investigation." But the tone was wrong, too aggressive, too forced. The admiral knew this wasn't official. From his cover, he pressed the small emergency button on his wristwatch again. That single signal sent an immediate alert to the federal team, marking his live position with a red warning. Back in the command van, the room erupted in movement. "Signal confirmed." "He's engaged," shouted one of the agents. Within seconds, federal response teams hidden in nearby blocks were mobilized. Black vans with tinted windows roared to life, speeding toward the coordinates. Helicopters were alerted, and the quiet night air began to fill with distant mechanical hums. On the ground, the attackers moved closer to the admiral's car, aiming to make it look like a confrontation gone wrong. One of them spoke hurriedly through his radio. "Get it done and leave. We can't stay long." The admiral remained low, counting the sounds of footsteps and voices. He could tell there were at least 3 men, maybe more. He spotted one of their shadows moving near the car's front tire. He picked up a small piece of metal lying near him and tossed it in the opposite direction. The sound distracted the attacker for a split second, just long enough for the admiral to crawl behind a container stack. He looked around for any kind of cover or exit. There was a fence at the far end, and beyond it the open road. But reaching it meant exposing himself. He had no weapon, only his phone, which was useless now. Still, he trusted that help was on its way. Minutes passed like hours. The attackers were growing anxious. One of them shouted, "Check the car."
"He must still be inside."
Another replied, "No, he's hiding. We need to finish this before backup comes." Just then, the sound of engines echoed from a distance, deep, heavy, and fast. The attackers froze for a moment, unsure what it was. The admiral recognized it instantly. Tactical vehicles. The silence broke when bright floodlights from multiple directions hit the area. A voice from a loudspeaker boomed, "Federal agents, drop your weapons and step away." The sudden burst of light and noise caught the attackers completely off guard. They tried to retreat toward their vehicles, but it was too late. Armed federal teams surrounded them within seconds, blocking every exit. The admiral stayed behind the containers, watching as chaos unfolded around him. One of the attackers fired a single shot into the air, not at anyone, just out of panic. That was enough for the agents to respond. They moved in quickly, disarming and tackling the suspects to the ground without serious injury. Within minutes, the entire area was secured. The admiral finally stood up, brushing the dust from his jacket. A federal officer rushed toward him and guided him to safety. "You all right, sir?" the agent asked. The admiral nodded, still catching his breath. "Yes, but I think we just caught the wrong people doing the right job." As the agents handcuffed the suspects, one of them shouted angrily, "You don't understand. We had no choice." But his words were drowned out by the noise of radios and vehicles. The federal team immediately began scanning the area for evidence. They found discarded communication devices, fake license plates, and a laptop with encrypted files left inside the pickup truck. Everything pointed to a planned and organized attack, not a random event. Later that night, inside the command van, the admiral watched the live replay from the surveillance drones. He saw himself stepping out of the car, the attackers moving into position, and the federal intervention happening in real time. It was surreal, like watching a movie in which he was both the target and the survivor. One of the agents turned to him and said, "You understand, sir? This operation just opened a much bigger door. These men are not working alone." The admiral nodded slowly. "I know, they're following orders. Someone higher is pulling the strings." The agent handed him a file. Inside were photographs of the attackers taken during booking. Their service badges were scanned and verified. All 3 were active police officers, assigned to the city's internal security unit. The admiral's expression hardened. "So it's true," he whispered. "The rot starts from within." Word spread quickly among the federal team. Arresting serving police officers in an attempted attack was serious business. It meant the case would now go beyond local authorities and reach the capital. The operation had turned into a full-blown federal investigation overnight. By morning, the entire port was buzzing with rumors. Workers whispered that there had been a shootout involving high-ranking officers. Reporters began circling the area, trying to get statements. The local police department issued a short statement claiming it was a misunderstanding during a security check, but no one believed it. The admiral was advised to stay out of public view for a few days. He was taken to a secure location where federal investigators questioned him about everything: the anonymous message, the ambush, and the people he suspected inside his department. He answered calmly, giving every detail he could remember. What stood out most to the investigators was how coordinated the attack had been. It wasn't something a few desperate officers could have arranged on their own. It required access to resources, vehicles, and inside information about federal movements. That meant someone higher up, possibly even a senior official, and was involved. For the admiral, the relief of surviving was mixed with anger. He had dedicated his life to protecting the law, only to discover that the same law was being used by criminals in uniform. But he also felt a sense of clarity. The mask was off now. There was no pretending anymore. Later that evening, as he looked out the window of the federal office building, the city lights glimmered far below. The same port that once felt like his responsibility now felt like a battlefield. But he wasn't going to give up, not now. The failed attack had only made him more determined. He turned to the lead investigator and said quietly, "They wanted to silence me. Instead, they've given me a louder voice. Let's finish this properly." The investigator nodded. "We will, sir." And this time they won't see it coming. Outside, the federal vehicles moved silently through the streets, carrying the arrested officers to a secure facility. Their radios, phones, and financial records were already being analyzed. Names were beginning to surface, and the web of corruption was slowly unraveling. The attempted attack had backfired, completely and publicly. But the story wasn't over yet. For the admiral, this was just the beginning of a much bigger fight. The next morning, the city woke up to a storm, not of rain, but of news. Reports spread like wildfire. Rumors of a failed attack at the port filled television screens and online headlines. Nobody knew the full story, but whispers of corrupt officers and federal action were everywhere. The port workers who had seen flashing lights the previous night were already talking. People said federal vehicles had blocked the docks, that shots were fired, and that several officers had been taken away. Inside the federal headquarters, the atmosphere was tense. The admiral sat quietly in a small meeting room while senior agents discussed their next steps. Files, photographs, and evidence covered the large table. The air smelled of coffee and stress. One of the agents placed a folder in front of the admiral. Inside were documents confirming what he had feared. The attackers were indeed part of the police department, and one of them had been assigned as his liaison officer just weeks ago. The admiral looked at the papers for a moment, then said softly, "So it was never about smugglers alone. The system itself was protecting them." The lead investigator nodded. "And it's deeper than we thought. Those 3 men we caught, they were just foot soldiers. Someone above them gave the order. We found messages on their encrypted phones. The instructions came from a number registered under a fake identity, but the signal traces back to the city's police headquarters." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. A high-ranking official was involved, possibly someone powerful enough to manipulate duty rosters, erase reports, and assign people to specific shifts. The admiral took a deep breath. "If that's the case, we can't trust anyone outside this room," he said firmly. "Every move we make from now on must be off the record." The investigators agreed. They decided to move quickly before anyone inside the police department could destroy evidence or warn others. By the afternoon, quiet orders were issued to federal field units across the city. Without alerting local law enforcement, they began collecting data from surveillance servers, accessing financial systems, and interviewing staff at the port who had worked under the admiral. Meanwhile, inside the police headquarters, things were not calm. Officers who had lost contact with their arrested colleagues were panicking. A few of them started deleting files and messages from their phones. Others began calling their contacts in government circles, trying to find out what was going on. But it was already too late. The federal team had tapped into their communication networks. Every call, every text, every login was being tracked. As the day went on, the admiral found himself watching everything unfold from the sidelines. He felt strange, uncaught between being a victim and a witness. He wanted to go back to the port, to continue his work, but the federal agents wouldn't allow it. "It's not safe," they told him. "We're still cleaning up what they left behind." In the evening, the federal director arrived from the capital. He was an older man, calm but authoritative. He shook the admiral's hand firmly and said, "You've done more than your duty, and now it's our turn. We're going to finish this." The admiral appreciated the words, but his mind wasn't at ease. He couldn't stop thinking about the men who had betrayed their badges. He kept wondering what drove them to do it. Was it greed, fear, or loyalty to someone powerful? That night, as the federal teams carried out raids across the city, the admiral stood by the window of his temporary residence. From the 10th floor, he could see flashing lights far in the distance, quiet signs of operations happening under the cover of darkness. He didn't know exactly what was going on, but he knew justice was finally catching up. Just after midnight, his phone rang. It was the lead investigator. "Sir, we got something big," the voice said quickly. One of the arrested officers started talking. "He says the order to target you came directly from a senior officer in the city's law enforcement division. We're confirming the details now." The admiral felt his pulse quicken. "Do we have proof?" he asked. "Not yet, but we're close," the agent replied. "We traced multiple bank transfers from a front company. All 3 attackers received payments from that same source." "Then find the source," the admiral said. "That's where the truth is." The next morning, the federal team raided a small office building in the industrial zone, the listed address of that front company. What they found was astonishing. The office looked abandoned, but inside were servers, hard drives, and dozens of fake company records. The data revealed a network of shell businesses used to launder money from illegal shipments through the port. The operation had been running for years, protected by people in positions of power. When the investigators showed the findings to the admiral, he remained silent for a long time. "They used our own systems to hide their crimes," he said finally. "It's not just corruption, it's betrayal." By now, the story had leaked to the press. The words federal investigation and police involvement began appearing in headlines. Journalists camped outside the federal office, shouting questions whenever someone stepped out. Government officials tried to calm the situation by promising full cooperation, but behind the scenes, panic spread through the ranks of those who had something to hide. Later that afternoon, the federal director held a closed-door meeting. The admiral was invited too. The director explained that they had enough evidence to justify an internal operation, one that would target the corrupted network within law enforcement itself. "But," he said gravely, "we have to move tonight. If we wait, they'll bury everything," the admiral agreed. "Let's finish what they started," he said. That night, just before midnight, federal vehicles rolled out quietly in small groups. Their engines barely made a sound as they approached multiple targets across the city: homes, offices, and police stations. Everything was timed to happen within minutes of each other. At one of the police precincts, an officer on duty looked up in shock as federal agents entered the building. Within moments, desks were searched, computers seized, and officers questioned. Some cooperated, others didn't. Files that had been marked confidential were taken into evidence. By dawn, nearly a dozen officers were in custody. At the same time, another team stormed a luxury apartment near the harbor. Inside, they found a senior police commander trying to destroy his phone and laptop. He was arrested on the spot. On his devices, they later found encrypted messages that matched the orders given to the 3 men who had attacked the admiral. When the news reached the admiral, he didn't celebrate. He just sat quietly, thinking about how things had come to this point. The very people who had sworn to protect others had turned against their own. Yet he also felt a deep sense of relief. The truth was finally out in the open. By morning, the whole city was talking about it. Reporters called it the biggest internal corruption scandal in decades. The police department released a short statement saying it would cooperate fully with federal investigators. But the damage was already done. Public trust had been shattered. The admiral gave his first official statement later that day. He spoke simply, without anger or pride. "This is not a victory," he said. "It's a reminder that when power is misused, no one is safe, not even those who enforce the law. But what matters is that justice still works. It may be slow, but it never sleeps." His words struck a chord with many people. Within hours, social media was flooded with messages of support. Citizens praised his courage and demanded deeper reforms in law enforcement. For the first time in years, there was hope that real change might be coming. That evening, the admiral sat in the quiet of his office, the same place where this had all begun. He looked at the photo on his desk, a picture of the port at sunrise taken years ago when he first took the job. Back then, he had believed that hard work and honesty were enough to keep things clean. Now he knew it wasn't that simple. The door opened and one of the federal agents stepped in. "Sir," he said, "we've just confirmed that the federal prosecutor has filed charges against 12 officers, including the commander. They'll face trial next month." The admiral nodded slowly. "Then it's over," he said softly. The agent hesitated. "Maybe not completely. We're still tracing the money. There could be others." The admiral smiled faintly. "There always are. But at least now, they know they can't hide forever." As night fell over the city once again, the admiral stepped outside the building. The air was cool, and the harbor lights reflected off the water like scattered stars. The same port that had nearly cost him his life now stood quiet, watched over by new officers who had sworn to do better. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "Sometimes justice doesn't come in silence. Sometimes it arrives with sirens." Weeks passed since the night the federal teams stormed the city. The chaos that once filled the news had slowly begun to settle. Yet behind the quiet streets and calm headlines, the aftershocks were still being felt. Inside offices, people whispered carefully before speaking about what had happened. In government circles, some avoided the topic entirely. But among the public, the story had taken on a life of its own, a symbol of how courage and truth could still stand up against power. The admiral had returned to his work at the port, though his days were very different now. There were more security checks, more reports to sign, and more people watching him than ever before. But he didn't complain. He was grateful just to walk among his team again, to see the sea every morning, and to know that those who had tried to silence him were finally facing justice. Still, the scars were there, not the kind seen on the skin, but the ones that settled deep in the mind. Each time he heard a loud noise, he found himself turning sharply as if expecting danger. Each time a police car passed by, a part of him tensed without reason. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something heavier, a reminder of how fragile trust can be once it's broken. The federal trial began in the capital city. 12 officers stood accused, including the senior commander. Cameras flashed as they were brought into court under heavy escort. The admiral was not present for the first hearing, but he watched it quietly on television from his office. The sight didn't bring him joy. Instead, it brought a strange sadness, seeing men in uniform once sworn to protect now sitting behind glass as defendants. His assistant walked in holding a file. "Sir," she said, "the prosecutor's office wants your statement for the final hearing. They say your testimony will help close the case." He nodded. "Tell them I'll be there," he said. Over the following days, he prepared himself, not just with documents or reports, but mentally. He knew that standing in that courtroom wouldn't just be about telling the truth. It would be about facing everything he had gone through. On the morning of his testimony, the sky was overcast. The streets leading to the courthouse were lined with reporters. Cameras clicked the moment he stepped out of the car. Questions were thrown at him from every direction, about the attack, about the corruption, about whether he trusted the system again. He didn't respond. He just nodded politely and walked inside.